Hey everybody, this is Chief with BostonCannabis.Info. Thanks for joining us. We got an interesting one for you today. I'm just still getting set up here and I've had some technical problems with the audio, so I hope there's no issues. Give me a call, 857-505-8811 if you're having a problem with the audio. You know, we're gonna do one of those red pill, blue pill moments today, because this cannabis culture is coming so fast. It's being integrated and brought into the mainstream so fast that some things are getting lost and overlooked. Some people are gonna feel really confused when these truths come to light. So we're going to start working through some of them now. Yep. This is Chief with BostonCannabis.Info doing the YouTube live broadcast every Wednesday. Just after 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We talk about news and information related to cannabis, and more specifically in the Boston region. Thanks for tuning in. Like I said, we're going to get into one of the main cultural lies that us cannabis people in the cannabis community face. And as the mainstream's more accepting of cannabis culture, they're going to come into contact with more cannabis history. Most folks only relate to cannabis as marijuana, the marijuana they learned about as a child. And what they learned about as a child came from the government and their peers, perhaps. Well, there's really no scholarly knowledge of cannabis in these type of circles. The scholarly knowledge was excluded. So once you start looking deep into the books, into the history, you'd be shocked to find how deeply intertwined cannabis is with the human relationship and human history. And so I could start at a whole bunch of different places with this conversation, but because we're in Boston, we'll start with the name of one of these researchers who I think everyone should absolutely look into. He's been a professor over there at Boston University in the Classical Studies Department for a while. His name is Carl P. Ruck, R-U-C-K. And he studies mythology and religion. And Professor Carl P. Ruck coined the term entheogen. Entheogen. E-N-T-H-O-G-E-N. Professor Carl P. Ruck coined the term entheogen, which is basically a term that can be used for a substance or a drug that's typically from plants, but it's used to it's used in a spiritual process. So it's basically some type of drug use or related drug use that's used for a spiritual purpose. Let's see what we have a definition on here. A chemical substance typically of plant origin that's ingested to produce a non-ordinary state of consciousness for religious or spiritual purposes. That's an entheogen. Also, right here in Boston, we have a professor that coined that term. And so part of his research is cannabis research, and he studies cannabis use in religion, going back through thousands of years, of course, and his research is very interesting. I suggest you check out the most easiest thing to do is go into YouTube, right on YouTube, Professor Carl P. Ruck, and the search term marijuana or cannabis. You'll be able to see a couple seminars and talks that he's done, and he'll explain quite clearly that cannabis is not just a part of all of these very old religions, but of course it was there at the beginning of these modern religions that we know. And this is a suppressed part of history. But see, the beautiful thing about knowledge, you can go back and learn. The world can become ignorant, but there's books. You can go back and learn what people have forgotten. And so, I believe he has a PhD from Harvard. Whatever that means. It was very interesting because he states very clearly that scholars like him have known cannabis is in the Bible and in the Old Testament for close to 100 years. So this is well-known information in his circles. And they just kind of take it for granted. Yeah, cannabis was in the Bible. It's part of the early Christian religion, part of the early Hebrew religion. Ancient Hebrew religion. Fine. That's fine. That's not really common knowledge, but okay. And if you go look this up anywhere, you'll find it. It will be tucked as a footnote, but you'll find it. Cannabism is in the Old Testament and is part of these ancient Hebrew traditions. I think it's very interesting when you look today, another very easy Google search on Israel and cannabis, just those two simple search terms into Google, will bring back several stories about how Israel is leading the world in cannabis research. The country of Israel is leading the world in cannabis research. Okay, fine. Sure, fine. No big deal. Now, we're having all these new breakthroughs in the medical field due to cannabis now being included as a legitimate treatment as far as certain governments are seeing here in America. We have Israel leading the world in the research. All at the same time, recreational use of cannabis in Israel is illegal, as far as I know. So you have like a worldwide suppression of cannabis by governments and religions. All at the same time. Cannabis is at the foundation of all of these very religions. Deeply intertwined. And I urge folks to look into the scholarship, look into the books if you have an issue with that. But it makes sense because cannabis has been with us for thousands of years. So, I mean, people have been using it. So the red pill, blue pill stuff is that, you know, if cannabis is then becomes accepted as, okay, it's just a part of these early religions, well then serious people, especially here in America, serious people who are looking into the Christian faith and are honest about finding out what's truly in the Bible, well, this information has got to be part of what they're going to find. And unfortunately, the government, our government here in America, and most of these religions, once again, have been lying about cannabis. They've been lying about cannabis. They've been lying about its dangers. They've been lying about its history. They've been lying about the culture. They've been lying about the consumers. They've been demonizing cannabis consumers for so long because it's been good for their politics and for their pocketbooks. But now, like I said, the unfortunate truth is going to come and hit them all. Cannabis is biblical. Cannabis is religious. Cannabis is spiritual. And you really can't prove, it'd be very difficult to prove otherwise. For a serious person, you know. I know we live in a new age, an era where truth, history, and facts are malleable, and people can say and believe almost anything they want. Well, I don't really subscribe to that. I'm from the older school. I read books and, dig into stuff with more thought. And I'm comfortable with that. So they've been demonizing cannabis all the while. Hypocrites, truly, because cannabis they've been lying about this history. They've been lying. So what does this mean? When people file into church and they say, oh, well, cannabis was part of this history, this religious history, but these people have all been telling me it's not. It can just lead people to start really digging for other truths and find out what else they've been lied to about. So cannabis culture is changing. We don't know where it's going. But there is this underlying truth, this underlying reality, right? The governments or religions have caught the wind of this change in the culture. And so now, what will they do now? When this little secret is out, now they're going to try to co-opt the community. Let's see how it works. We have to respect this plant, folks. Cannabism in the Old Testament. I'll be right back. Yeah, technical difficulties, but it's all good. We were talking about spiritual cannabis and the fact that this history's been hidden for many years, and now it's finally coming to the light. You're going to have new church scholarship looking into cannabis in these religions, all brand new. Remember, the cannabis community has been here already. It's just that new folks are going to come to this information, and it's radical information. So when you look at this, radical information puts cannabis into the holy anointed oil of the Bible. Puts cannabis into the holy incense of the Bible. Radically changing how you see those events that unfold in those biblical tales. And it's interesting that this word cannibalism that we find in the Old Testament, cannibalism was an ancient Hebrew word for cannabis. And it's just interesting to find that when you find that the country of Israel today is the leading research nation on cannabis, leading all the research on cannabis in the world. And yet, folks are reluctant to admit cannabis's role in humanity, in the history of all of us. Because that history is ugly. And most folks have no clue. Most folks aren't too interested in history, but if you do look, you'll find how the church and authorities have treated people who've been found in the possession of cannabis or have cannabis knowledge. Why has this knowledge been so threatening? Because it exposes secrets of the church. These secrets expose secrets of the church and of government. Right? Cannabis prohibition was not a secret. But the government treated a lot of the racially discriminatory aspects of cannabis prohibition as a secret. So they're saying that they're protecting the community from all these drugs and all these bad people, when really they're just trying to fill up jails and make money. They lied about how dangerous cannabis was for their greedy, dirty little games. And so once people learn all this, they say, well, I'm not on the side of these types of people and movements. This cannabis prohibitionist movement all through history has really been on the wrong side. Once people learn that stuff. So it's easier for people who are against cannabis to not know anything about cannabis history and to not know those things. It's easier for them to not know those things if they're going to discriminate or they're going to have negative views towards cannabis community or cannabis itself. It serves those people to be ignorant. And so because we haven't had all this cannabis knowledge and because cannabis has been suppressed and prohibited, that served these people very well, because people have not truly known all the benefits that cannabis has to the human body, and also the benefits that that cannabis can have for human spirituality, which must sound totally wild, but see, it only sounds like that because they've conditioned us to think that cannabis is some deep, dark, dirty drug. But wine and beer are great. Wine and beer are great. I mean, you know, yikes. Yes, monks made beer, and yes, monks made wine. Yes, monks also tended cannabis harvest, cultivation, and crops. Yes. Why? Why don't they talk about that now? Why would you be scared of this history? Because it exposes secrets that people would rather not have exposed and rather just not talk about. Like some of these rituals and so on that they do in the church will change now if you start understanding that cannabis may be involved in this ritual or this sacrament. That's why they say don't bother. Oh, that's why when you talk to some newer Christians, they'll say don't read the Old Testament. They'll say don't read the Old Testament, read the New Testament. Yeah, don't bother with the Old Testament because you know that's old. They don't want you to really know all that stuff. Just read the last few. Just read the end. So how does our society react now? Or do they just continue to deny? You have certain people who deny the reality of cannabis in human history and how it is been such a part of all of our world religions. They'd like to just say, oh yeah, it used to be, but that doesn't matter now. That's not relevant to today. Yes, it was there. It's a very important part of the early formation of the church, but yeah, that's not relevant today. To know about any parts of Christianity. This is what they would have you believe. This is after, of course, a very, very long, violent propaganda campaign against cannabis and its consumers. So we all know the church is really good at demonizing things that they don't like. The church is very good demonizing things they don't like, and they don't like a lot of stuff, right? Well, we've heard it all. Cannabis cultivation, cannabis use, cannabis knowledge through history was also deeply tied to women. Because women were the first doctors. The moms and the grandmas and the aunties and the women, what do you call those? Midwives. The midwives. Your first doctor. When you were a little baby, when people were born, it was usually the midwives who were their first doctor. And they knew how to use different herbal potions or different herbal medicines for different uses. They had to. This was their job. They were trying to relieve pain. They were trying to keep people alive. So naturally, cannabis was something that they used regularly. I'm talking about herbalists, female herbalists. And so when this feminine herbalist knowledge, medicine knowledge, technology, this knowledge of the body, this knowledge of how to heal the human body with natural plants, when this knowledge threatened the church, as it did so many times, The church reacted violently. It's a threat to their authority if there's another healer out there that's doing a better job than the church authority. It's a threat to their authority if there's another body of knowledge out there, like this feminine herbalist knowledge, that may actually be effective and may start getting the will of the people against the church and for them. So these movements were put down violently. And any evidence of someone having that alternative knowledge was a sign of their guilt. And it sounds fantastic and radical and crazy. But this is absolutely true history, and I'll help you out. I'll help you to understand it right now. So we're talking about women herbalists becoming enemies of the church early in church history because of their secret knowledge of plants like cannabis and how to heal. The church demonized these women, and an ugly, nasty, dirty stereotype started to really emerge and grab hold of the public's mind. It was the stereotype of the witch. The witch bent over a cauldron, mixing herbs and talking to the devil. These were evil women that couldn't be trusted and had to be destroyed on sight. And so if you found one of these traveling women, she doesn't have a man with her perhaps, and she may be treating young women who have been pregnant. Well, she may just very well be a witch. And we know how to deal with those things around here. This was really the attitude, folks. Right? And they would murder these women in public to terrorize the community. And they pushed this stereotype, the witch. So much so that women had to actually live in fear. Because to be called a witch was really all it took for some poor woman to be dragged into some new torture and death at the hands of religious people, religious authorities, and government. I'm talking about the history of the church murdering women who they claimed were heretics or these were knowledgeable women. They had information or knowledge that was contrary to what the church pushed. And folks, I'm telling you, if you look through the history, you'll find which side cannabis was on. And it's very unfortunate. There was a plague sweeping through Europe, the Black Plague. And it would kill all the people, and they really didn't know how to stop it, what to do. They pulled out all the old remedies that they could think of when the plague came to these little villages and communities. And the plague was just wiping out these whole communities. One of the more popular treatments that developed and that they started to use during that time was taken from these women herbalists. These women who would be later called witches and burned at the stake. It's a very common herbal remedy. It was known by different names through time. But by the time of the plague, they were trying everything. They adopted one of these remedies and even tried that. Now, which was this remedy? Well, it was cannabis. Cannabis was used by women for many many of these medicinal purposes. They knew the plant well and were able to extract the medicinal properties. So they used this cannabis salve, cannabis oil, cannabis mixture recipe, medicinal recipe, which you can find in old books. And they say, oh, this is a treatment for this is a treatment for that. But when the plague was wiping out Europe, this was one of the top recipes that rose to prominence. This is old cannabis recipe. And we know that the witch is an evil stereotype of women that allowed women to be destroyed and burned at the stake or drowned, tortured in front of the public. It reminds you of ISIS or something like that, just terror. They used cannabis to criminalize these women. Cannabis was one of the tools they used to criminalize them. The witch, the stereotype of the witch, was another tool, propaganda, that they used to keep women in fear. So it's easier for people to not know these histories because then they don't have to be conscious. And you'll see this. You'll see society not want to face the history of cannabis use through all humanity, but then every once in a while, of course, it will raise to prominence again because there's a need. So the suppression of cannabis, not just by the church, but by our governments, goes back hundreds, thousands of years even. And so what this, once again, it should show us is that, it's not really the physical dangers of cannabis. This is a social, political, cultural thing. And now our culture is about to change radically, and I understand many people are going to fight hard against this information. But that's what we're here for. If you got an issue with it, you can call me up, 857-505-8811. This is Chief with BostonCannabis.Info. We do a YouTube live broadcast every Wednesday, just after 1 o'clock or so. You can find us on the meetup, BostonCannabis.Info. Call us up, bring something into the show. We get a little deeper into the knowledge and history of cannabis that the cannabis community covets here. This is more than just we crack a couple books open over here.